Hey everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking into something pretty wild.
Yeah.
A book called Earthly Echoes of Solar Storms.
Oh, wow.
Have you heard of this?
I haven't.
It was by a guy named Alexander Chizhevsky.
Okay.
So this book is all about,
I'm intrigued.
well, it's all about how the sun impacts us here on Earth.
Interesting.
But like in ways you wouldn't even imagine.
Okay.
Like think beyond, sunshine and, the stuff that makes plants grow.
Right.
It's talking about how solar activity can affect.
Totally flares and things.
What? Yeah. And even beyond that, like how it can affect like historical events and pandemics and.
Whoa, hold on.
I know, right?
That's a big claim.
Yeah. So this Alexander Chizhevsky.
Yeah.
He was a scientist, but he was also kind of like a philosopher and a historian.
Interesting. So a bit of a Renaissance man.
Yeah, exactly. And he was really ahead of his time.
Okay. I'm claiming.
So back in the early 1900s, he was already talking about these connections between the sun and life on Earth.
Okay, but like how? What was his evidence?
Well, he did a ton of research, like analyzing historical records going back centuries, and he started noticing these patterns.
Okay. I love a good pattern.
Yeah, so he saw that like periods of intense solar activity, like when there's a lot of sunspots, often coincided with major events on Earth.
Interesting. Like what kind of events?
Like pandemics, wars, revolutions, you name it.
Whoa, really? That's a bit freaky.
Yeah, and before we all start panicking about the next solar flare,
Yeah.
let's break this down a bit.
Okay.
So first of all, hit that like button and subscribe.
Always got to get that plug in.
You know it. So back to sunspots. What exactly are they?
All right, so imagine the sun.
Yeah.
Big ball of gas, right?
Right.
It's constantly churning and bubbling and all that.
Yeah.
And sunspots, they're like these temporary cool spots on the surface.
Cool spots. But the sun is like super hot.
Yeah, well, cool is relative, I guess.
Okay.
They're still incredibly hot, just cooler than the surrounding areas. But here's the thing, those sunspots, they're not just random.
What do you mean?
They actually indicate areas of intense magnetic activity.
Oh, so like the sun's magnetic field is going haywire in those spots.
Exactly. It's like the sun's having a little magnetic tantrum.
I like that analogy.
Thanks.
Okay, so we've got this giant ball of gas with a temperamental magnetic field.
You got it.
But how does that translate into a pandemic here on Earth?
Well, those magnetic tantrums, those sunspots, they often lead to solar flares and coronal mass ejections.
Coronal mass, what now?
Basically, imagine huge bursts of energy and charged particles shooting out from the sun.
Oh, okay, so it's like the sun is sneezing and Earth is getting caught in the blast zone.
Pretty much. And when those particles hit Earth's magnetic field, it's like a cosmic shockwave.
Whoa.
We can sometimes see this interaction in the form of the aurora borealis, the northern lights.
Oh, yeah, those are beautiful.
Yeah, so we're talking space weather affecting light shows. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but how did Chizhevsky go from there to saying it's messing with human history and biology?
Well, he didn't stop at pretty lights. He proposed that these solar storms, those sneezes we were talking about, they could also disrupt radio communications, influence weather patterns, and even affect human health and behavior.
Hold on now, are we saying a bad solar storm could make me crave pizza and start arguments online?
Not quite. Chizhevsky's ideas are definitely on the edge, but they're fascinating to explore.
Okay, I'm willing to keep an open mind.
Good, because it gets even wilder from here.
Bring it on. I'm ready for more.
All right, so Chizhevsky believed that heightened solar activity might stimulate the human nervous system, leading to increased anxiety, agitation, and potentially a greater tendency for conflict.
So when the sun's feeling extra spicy, we all get a little bit spicier too.
It's an interesting concept, right? He even looked for patterns in historical data.
Like what kind of patterns?
Well, he found correlations between solar cycles and the spread of epidemics, for example. Yeah, like cholera outbreaks seem to align with peaks of solar activity.
Interesting.
He even suggested a link between solar cycles and fluctuations in mental health crime rates, social unrest.
Okay, my mind is officially blown.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in.
But before we go any further, we have to ask the big question.
What's that?
Is this legit science, or is Chizhevsky just a really good storyteller?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
His work is definitely controversial, but it's not without merit.
Okay, I can see that.
He was meticulous in his research analyzing data spanning centuries.
Yeah.
And while correlation doesn't equal causation, the patterns he observed are pretty compelling.
All right, let's hear about those patterns. Give us some specific examples of those historical correlations that Chizhevsky uncovered.
Okay, so for instance, he pointed to periods of intense solar activity coinciding with major pandemics.
Okay.
like the Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century.
Yeah, that was a horrific time.
It was. And the peak of the plague coincided with a period of heightened solar activity.
So you're saying the sun might have made the plague even worse?
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
And it's not just the Black Death. He saw similar correlations with other pandemics, too, suggesting that solar activity might somehow be influencing the virulence of pathogens or weakening the human immune system, making us more susceptible to disease.
Okay, that's a little scary to think about.
It is, but let's move on from plagues for a second.
Right.
What other historical events did Chizhevsky link to solar activity?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, he also observed correlations between periods of heightened solar activity and major social upheavals, like wars and revolutions.
Oh, wow.
He looked at data going back centuries and found some pretty striking examples.
Okay, you mean an example?
For instance, the period between 513 and 537 AD was marked by dramatic climate changes in Europe.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
Temperatures plummeted, leading to widespread crop failures and famine.
Yikes, that sounds rough.
It was. And Chizhevsky noted that this period coincided with a significant dip in solar activity.
So are we saying the sun's activity could be the ultimate cause of climate change?
Again, it's important to remember, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right.
Chizhevsky was very clear about that himself. But his observations raised some fascinating questions.
Yeah.
About the interconnectedness of Earth's systems and the profound influence of the sun.
This is getting pretty deep.
It is.
We're talking cosmic forces shaping the course of human history.
It's mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, but let's bring it back down to Earth for a second.
Okay.
What does all this mean for us here and now in the 21st century?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll be exploring in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Oh, perfect.
We'll delve into the contemporary research that's either supporting or challenging Chizhevsky's theories and look at the potential implications of his work for understanding everything from pandemics and climate change to the very fabric of life itself.
Wow. Okay, I can't wait.
Stay tuned.
Hey. All right, everyone, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 2, where we'll be separating cosmic fact from fiction and exploring the sun's impact on our modern world. Until then, keep those minds open and those curiosity levels high.
Absolutely. All right, so welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah, back into the world of Alexander Chizhevsky.
This guy's wild.
He really is.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about those historical correlations,
Yeah.
all those pandemics and wars and climate shifts.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. Like, it's making me look at the sun in a whole new way.
Yeah, you and me both.
So before we get too lost in the cosmos, I think we should zoom back in on some of the specifics.
Okay, sounds good.
Like, how exactly did Chizhevsky think solar activity was impacting life here on Earth?
Right, well, one of the most fascinating and also controversial areas of his research was on epidemics.
Okay, epidemics. So like the spread of diseases.
Exactly. He spent years poring over historical records of all kinds of diseases, from the plague to cholera. And he noticed this really strange pattern.
Let me guess. The outbreaks seem to line up with periods of high solar activity.
You got it. He even made these graphs,
Yeah.
charting the peaks of epidemics right alongside the peaks of solar activity.
Okay.
And when you see them side by side, it's pretty wild. The correlation is really striking.
I can imagine. I mean, that's a pretty powerful visual.
It is. But let's go beyond just the visuals. How did he actually explain this connection?
Yeah, what was the scientific mechanism he was proposing?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that's still being debated today.
Right.
Chizhevsky actually came up with a few different possibilities. One was that solar activity could directly influence how infectious or deadly pathogens are.
So like those charged particles from the sun, those cosmic sneezes we talked about?
Yeah.
They're basically bombarding bacteria and viruses and maybe even changing their DNA or behavior.
It's a wild idea, right?
It is.
Yeah.
But I kind of like it.
Yeah, it's definitely thought-provoking. Another possibility he considered was the impact of solar activity on Earth's electromagnetic field.
Right.
Okay.
Because we know those charged particles can mess with radio communications.
Yeah, exactly. Like when your radio gets all staticky during a thunderstorm, Chizhevsky thought those same disruptions could also affect the balance of Earth's magnetic field.
Okay.
And that, in turn, could influence biological processes, including the spread of disease.
So maybe those electromagnetic disruptions are weakening our immune systems.
Potentially. And he also pointed to the impact of solar activity on weather patterns.
Right. Because extreme weather events can definitely create the perfect conditions for diseases to spread.
For sure. Things like droughts and floods can lead to contaminated water,
Yeah.
food shortages, displacement of people. All of that can contribute to outbreaks.
So it's like this whole chain reaction.
Exactly, a complex web of interconnected factors.
And Chizhevsky was trying to untangle that web.
He was one of the first to really start connecting those dots and seeing the sun's potential role in all of it.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
There is some contemporary research that's actually starting to shed some light on those connections that Chizhevsky observed.
Oh, really? Okay, tell me more.
For instance, there are studies showing that geomagnetic storms, those disruptions in Earth's magnetic field, they can actually affect the production of melatonin in the human body.
Wait, melatonin, that's the hormone that helps us sleep, right?
That's the one. So we're saying a solar storm could mess with our sleep patterns.
Whoa, okay. I'm suddenly feeling a lot less silly about blaming my bad days on Mercury in retrograde.
It's a fascinating area of research, and it's gaining more attention as we learn more about how Earth's electromagnetic environment and our biology are interconnected.
It really is mind-blowing stuff.
It is. So while Chizhevsky might not have had all the answers, he was definitely on to something.
He was a pioneer for sure.
Yeah, paving the way for a whole new understanding of how life on Earth is connected to these cosmic forces.
All right, so we've talked about pandemics and we've talked about this electromagnetic connection.
Yeah.
But there's another big piece of Chizhevsky's work that we haven't touched on yet.
Which is?
His ideas about the sun's influence on human behavior and social trends.
Yes.
He believed that solar activity could actually impact the human nervous system.
That's right. He theorized that periods of high solar activity with all those electromagnetic disruptions could lead to higher levels of anxiety, agitation, even aggression in people.
So basically when the sun's having a mood swing, so are we.
It's a simplification, but that's the general idea.
Okay, so does this mean I can blame my road rage on a solar flare?
I wouldn't go that far. Human behavior is super complex.
Right.
It's influenced by so many things. But Chizhevsky's research suggests that solar activity might be one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Maybe it acts as an amplifier, If a society is already on edge because of political turmoil or economic hardship, then throw in a surge of solar activity, potentially boosting those feelings of anxiety and aggression. It's not hard to imagine how things could escalate.
I see what you mean. It's like the sun is adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. But let's be clear. Chizhevsky wasn't saying the sun causes wars or revolutions.
Right.
There are always multiple factors involved.
So it's more like the sun might be tipping the scales in some situations.
That's a good way to put it. He was just trying to bring attention to this often overlooked variable.
It's like we forget that we're part of this larger cosmic system.
Exactly. And there's actually modern research that's starting to support some of his ideas.
Really? Like what?
This is where things get even more fascinating.
All right, I'm ready.
To understand that, we need to talk about Schumann resonances.
Okay, Schumann resonances.
Yeah.
I've heard that term before, but honestly, it always sounded kind of sci-fi to me.
It does sound a bit like Star Trek, but it's a real phenomenon. Essentially, Schumann resonances, or SRs for short, are natural electromagnetic waves. They kind of resonate between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. That's a layer of charged particles high up in the atmosphere, so you can almost imagine them like electromagnetic waves bouncing around in a giant cavity.
So these waves are like constantly vibrating around us.
All the time, and here's where it gets really interesting. The fundamental frequency of these Schumann resonances is about 7.8 hertz. Does that sound familiar?
Wait a minute, 7.8 hertz. Isn't that close to the frequency of alpha brainwaves? The brainwaves we produce when we're relaxed and focused.
It is. It's a pretty remarkable coincidence. And while some people might dismiss it as just that, a coincidence, there have been studies showing that artificially produced frequencies in this range can influence mental performance, reaction time, even heart health. So it makes you wonder if maybe our brains are somehow syncing up with these naturally occurring electromagnetic waves in the Earth's atmosphere.
So like our brains might be humming along to the rhythm of the Earth.
Maybe. And it gets even more intriguing when you consider that the intensity of these Schumann resonances varies throughout the day. They actually peak in the morning.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah.
Morning peak, just like our circadian rhythm.
Exactly. And that leads us to the Earth's own magnetic field, which adds another layer to this whole electromagnetic symphony.
Okay.
We tend to think of the Earth's magnetic field as this static thing.
Right, like this protective bubble.
Right. But it's actually way more dynamic than that. It fluctuates in strength throughout the day and year. And guess when its daily peak in strength occurs?
Tell me. Morning.
You got it. The morning peak in the geomagnetic field strength, just like the peak in Schumann resonance intensity, aligns with the surge in activity of our circadian genes.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. So we've got the sun's activity, Schumann resonances, and the Earth's magnetic field, all potentially influencing our circadian rhythms and our health in ways we're just beginning to understand. But how are we actually sensing these subtle changes? It's not like we're consciously aware of them.
Right. That's the million-dollar question. Scientists are still trying to figure out the exact mechanisms, but there are a couple of leading theories that are particularly fascinating.
Okay, lay it on me.
So the first one involves cryptochromes. They're light-sensitive proteins found in our eyes that play a key role in regulating our circadian rhythms.
Right, cryptochromes. I remember reading about those. They're how our bodies know when it's light and dark, right?
Exactly. But what's intriguing is that these cryptochromes might also be influenced by magnetic fields. There's a process involving electron spins. Essentially, these tiny particles within our eyes might act like miniature compasses. They might be picking up on those subtle shifts in the Earth's magnetic field.
Wait, so you're saying our eyes might be doing more than just seeing? They could be sensing the Earth's magnetic field, too.
It's a possibility. And then there's the second theory. This one involves magnetite nanoparticles.
Magnetite. Isn't that what makes a compass work?
Exactly. And these magnetite nanoparticles have actually been found in the human brain, particularly in areas that are involved in movement and balance. So some scientists believe that these magnetite nanoparticles in our brains might act like mini compasses, allowing us to perceive changes in the geomagnetic field, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Okay, so we might have these tiny internal compasses in both our eyes and our brains, allowing us to tap into the Earth's magnetic field.
It's wild, isn't it?
It is. It's incredible to think that we could be so finely tuned to these subtle electromagnetic forces. It makes you wonder, if we're this intricately connected to the natural electromagnetic symphony of our planet and the sun, what happens when we introduce a whole bunch of man-made electromagnetic fields into the mix?
Oh, that's the big question, isn't it?
Because let's be real, we can't talk about electromagnetic fields and health without addressing the elephant in the room, electromagnetic pollution.
You're absolutely right. I mean, in today's world, we're bombarded with artificial EMFs. From wireless devices, power lines, you name it. It's everywhere.
I know. We're glued to our phones, bathed in Wi-Fi signals. It's enough to make your head spin. But seriously, what does the research say about the potential risks? Is this something we should be worried about?
Well, there's definitely a growing body of research that suggests that prolonged exposure to certain types of EMFs, particularly the radio frequency EMFs from cell phones and Wi-Fi, could be having some effects on our health. Some studies have linked EMF exposure to things like sleep disruption, DNA damage, and even possible influences on our circadian rhythms.
Right. It's hard to ignore the fact that we're constantly exposed to these artificial EMFs. It's like we're living in this invisible fog of electromagnetic energy. But before we get too deep into that rabbit hole, it takes me back to Chizhevsky and how he was practically laughed out of the scientific community for even suggesting that things like wars and revolutions could be tied to these solar cycles.
Well, he was definitely pushing the boundaries of what people were willing to consider back then.
But what if he was right? I mean, even if he couldn't quite explain the how back then.
Well, one paper you shared delves into a potential link between these solar cycles and, get this, the rates of mental illness.
Really? Like affecting our minds.
The researchers suggest that the intensity of ultraviolet radiation from the sun, the UVR, could potentially predispose people to certain mental health conditions.
Ultraviolet radiation messing with our brains. That's a new one.
It sounds wild, I know, but think about it. Organisms have to adapt to their environment to survive, right? And when we're exposed to high levels of UVR, our bodies try to compensate.
Right, like how people who live closer to the equator tend to have darker skin.
Exactly. It's evolution at work. But the authors of this study suggest that sometimes those adaptations aren't perfect. And those intense bursts of energy from the sun might lead to genetic changes that could manifest as, neurochemical imbalances that contribute to mental health issues.
So it's not just the immediate effect of the sun's radiation, it's the long-term impact on our genes.
Potentially, yeah. And it could even play out across generations.
Whoa. That's heavy stuff. Makes you wonder what else Chizhevsky might have been right about.
Well, get ready for this one. You also shared a study about a possible connection between the sun and how long we live.
Wait, are you serious? The sun could affect our lifespan.
The researchers in this study analyzed birth years and lifespans of over 320,000 people.
That's a lot of data.
Oh, it is. And they found something pretty fascinating. People born during the peak years of the 11-year solar cycle, those years with the most solar activity, tended to have shorter lifespans compared to folks born when the sun was a bit quieter.
Wow. But how? What's the mechanism?
They suspect it has to do with ultraviolet radiation, that UVR we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. And there's more of that when the sun's more active.
Exactly. And UVR has been shown to suppress the mother's immune system during pregnancy. So the researchers think that early exposure to high levels of UVR, while the baby is still developing, might have long-term consequences for their health and, well, how long they live.
It's kind of poetic in a way. Like, the sun's energy is shaping our lives even before we're born.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? This idea that we're all part of something much bigger and more intricate than we often realize.
Absolutely. It makes me think of Chizhevsky again, and how he was trying to tell us that we're not just spectators in this cosmic dance. We're part of it.
He was definitely on to something. And all this research just underscores how much we still have to learn about our place in the universe.
This has been an incredible deep dive so far. I feel like my whole worldview is shifting.
It's quite a rabbit hole we've gone down. There are even studies linking geomagnetic storms to an increased risk of heart attacks and strokes.
Okay, so maybe we should all be paying more attention to space weather.
I think it's worth considering. And this is all building on that fundamental insight that Chizhevsky had.
That we're not just these isolated beings on a planet.
Exactly. We're part of this massive, interconnected cosmic system.
And the sun plays a much bigger role than we ever realized.
It's a pretty humbling thought when you really think about it.
It is. It's making me want to go outside and stare at the stars.
I know, me too. But maybe with some good sunglasses on this time.
Definitely a good call.
It is, and it just goes to show that we're more connected to the sun than we often realize.
Like we're all characters in this giant cosmic play, and the sun is the director.
I love that analogy, and that's one of the most compelling aspects of Chizhevsky's work. He challenges us to think outside of our usual human-centered perspective.
Right.
To recognize that there are these powerful cosmic forces at play that are shaping our world in ways we don't even fully understand.
Yeah, it's definitely a humbling thought.
It is, and it's a perspective that's becoming more and more relevant as we learn more about the interconnectedness of our universe.
This has been an incredible journey so far. I feel like I'm seeing the world in a whole new light.
Me too. It's like Chizhevsky has given us a new lens to view reality through.
And speaking of new lenses,
yeah,
I'm really curious to hear about the cutting-edge research that's either supporting or challenging his theories.
Oh, that's coming up in the final part of our deep dive.
Perfect.
We're going to delve into the potential implications of his work for understanding the challenges and possibilities of the 21st century.
I can't wait. This is getting good. Welcome back to the show, everyone.
Back for more cosmic revelations.
That's right. We're still deep in the world of Alexander Chizhevsky and his mind-blowing theories about the sun.
Yeah, this guy really shook things up.
He did. Last time we were talking about how modern science is starting to back up some of his more controversial ideas.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see how some of his observations are being validated by contemporary research.
So what's the takeaway here? What do we do with all of this information?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that we're not as separate from the cosmos as we often think.
Right. We're part of this larger interconnected system.
Exactly. And the sun plays a much bigger role in our lives than we might realize.
It's a pretty humbling thought.
It is. And it's something that Alexander Chizhevsky was trying to tell us all those years ago.
He was way ahead of his time.
He was a true visionary.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to remember about Chizhevsky and his work?
I think it's the importance of keeping an open mind.
Yeah.
Chizhevsky challenged the conventional wisdom of his time.
He did. And he was often ridiculed for his ideas.
But he kept asking questions. He kept exploring.
And in the end, he opened up a whole new way of understanding our relationship with the sun and the cosmos.
Exactly. And that's something we can all learn from.
So to everyone listening out there, remember to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Well said.
If Chizhevsky taught us anything, it's that the universe is full of surprises.
And that we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of its mysteries.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Alexander Chizhevsky and his book, Earthly Echoes of Solar Storms.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground, from pandemics and wars to the impact of solar flares on our technology and even our sleep.
Yeah, Chizhevsky's ideas are definitely mind-bending.
They are, but they also make you think about the world in a whole new way.
And that's what makes them so powerful.
So if you're looking for a book that will challenge your assumptions and expand your understanding of the universe, I highly recommend checking out Earthly Echoes of Solar Storms.
It's a classic for a reason.
And who knows, maybe it will inspire you to make some groundbreaking discoveries of your own.
The possibilities are endless.
And as always, we want to thank you for joining us on this journey of intellectual exploration.
It's always a pleasure to share these deep dives with you.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Until next time, keep those minds open, keep those curiosity levels high, and keep reaching for the stars.
See you next time.